The last thing I remember before leaving that cabin, before I grabbed my bag at 2 in the morning and drove down a mountain I couldn't see, was a photograph on my phone. I'd taken it the day before. Just the bathroom mirror, fogged up, one handprint on the glass. I've looked at that photo maybe 100 times since, and every single time I have to put my phone down, because the fingers are too long. Not a lot, just enough. Just enough to know it wasn't mine. The listing looked perfect. Tucked somewhere deep in the Blue Ridge outside of Boone, North Carolina, it had those classic cabin photos every tired 20-something dreams about. Rough-hewn log walls, a cast-iron stove, a porch rail draped in fog. The reviews were mostly glowing, 4.8 stars. One reviewer called it a reset for the soul. I booked it without thinking twice and drove up alone on a Friday after a week that had nearly broken me. I needed the silence. What I got was something else entirely. The drive in was the first sign I should have turned around. The GPS lost signal about 4 miles from the property, and the gravel road the host's instructions described turned into 2 tire-pressed dirt paths through a tunnel of old-growth hemlocks so dense the headlights barely found the next turn. By the time I saw the cabin's porch light, it felt less like arriving somewhere and more like being swallowed by the mountain. I parked, grabbed my bag, and let myself in with the lockbox code. The cabin smelled like cedar and something older, something wet and earthy that no amount of plug-in air freshener could quite cover. The first night was quiet enough. I ate, I read, I passed out by 10. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, I woke to what I can only describe as footsteps. Not outside, inside. The measured, deliberate creak of old floorboards, crossing the main room from the fireplace wall to the kitchen and back. I lay completely still, my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the flashlight. Bears, I told myself. Someone walking in the woods nearby. Acoustics. Old houses breathe. I believed all of it enough to eventually fall back asleep. Morning was fine. Coffee on the porch, mist rolling through the tree line, a pair of deer in the field below. I even laughed at myself. I ate breakfast, went for a short hike on a trail behind the property, and by the time I got back, I'd written the whole thing off. Then I walked into the bathroom. On the mirror, fogged lightly despite the dry, cold air, was a palm print. One palm print, fingers spread wide, at the exact height of my own hand if I pressed it flat. Except I hadn't. I know I hadn't. The bathroom had been cold enough that morning that I hadn't even showered. I'd just grabbed a quick sink rinse. That print wasn't mine, and there was no one else in the cabin. I messaged the host. He responded fast and friendly. Must be condensation from the pipes, he said. It happens up there, nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him. I spent the afternoon forcing normalcy. I made soup. I put on a podcast. I stacked a fire and watched it burn. But as dusk came in and the temperature outside dropped into the 20s, the feeling in the cabin shifted in a way I can't fully articulate even now. The air got heavier. The dog I don't have would have had its hackles up if I had one. I started noticing things I'd looked past on arrival. A small cross made of sticks above the back door that I'd assumed was decorative. A ring of ash on the hearthstone. Too perfect to be random. A child's shoe. Just one. Tucked sideways behind the woodpile like someone had pushed it there quickly. I took a photo of each of them. I don't know why. I think some part of me was already documenting, already trying to make what was happening feel manageable. The second night, I didn't sleep at all. At 1 a.m, the rocking chair on the porch, which I could see through the window from the couch where I'd planted myself with every light on, began to move, slow and steady, steady and slow. There was no wind. I have the video. 47 seconds of a rocking chair moving on a windless porch on a mountain in the middle of nothing, and I am in that video too, reflected in the glass, completely still, every hair on my body standing at attention. At 1:48 a.m., I put my bag in my car. At 2:02 a.m., I was driving back down the mountain without the GPS, without service, navigating by memory through a tunnel of black hemlocks, not caring even slightly that I might get lost. Getting lost felt fine. Staying felt impossible. I left the lockbox key under the mat. I never messaged the host again. And that palm print. I went back and looked at the photo I took of it. The fingers are slightly too long. Just slightly. Enough. I want to be precise about the timeline, because when people hear this story, they always assume I must have missed some early warning sign, some obvious flag I waved away out of politeness or denial. I didn't. Or if I did, it was the kind of warning sign that only reads as a warning sign in retrospect. After everything has gone wrong and you're sitting in a police station at midnight trying to describe a face. The Airbnb was a 2-bedroom cabin outside of Erwin, Tennessee, right at the foot of the Unaka mountain range. My girlfriend and I booked it for a long weekend in October. The photos showed a fire pit, a hot tub, a mountain view from the back deck. The price was reasonable. The reviews were good. We were excited. The man was already at the property when we arrived. That's the first thing. He was standing in the gravel turnout when we pulled in, pretending to check something on the rural electric box at the edge of the tree line. He waved. He said he was the neighbor. His property abutted the rental's land, he explained cheerfully, on the eastern side. He seemed friendly in a way that asked something of you. The way friendliness sometimes does when it's performing rather than feeling. We said hello. We went inside. My girlfriend said, he was standing there waiting, and I told her she was reading into it. I want to note, for the record, that she was not reading into it. He came by again 2 hours later, this time to the back deck, while we were in the hot tub. He leaned on the railing above us and said he just wanted to make sure we knew where the breaker box was in case the power cut out, which apparently happened sometimes up here in Wind. He talked for 11 minutes. I counted later, watching the security camera footage the Airbnb host eventually pulled for the police report. 11 minutes of standing above 2 people in a hot tub, uninvited, talking about power outages and deer season and how long he'd lived on this mountain. When he finally left, my girlfriend and I looked at each other and didn't say what either of us was thinking. That night, we deadbolted the front door and pushed a kitchen chair under the back door handle, which didn't have a real lock. I told myself we were being paranoid. We ate dinner, watched something on a laptop, went to bed. At 2:17 a.m., again, I have the timestamp from the host's camera. The back door opened. Not broke open. Opened. As if with a key or because the chair had shifted. We heard it immediately, that specific silence of a space changing when a new presence enters it, and then a floorboard, and then another. My girlfriend grabbed my arm in the dark so hard she left bruises. I had my phone in my hand. I dialed 911 and didn't press call. Then I turned on every light in the cabin from the switches by the bed, all at once, flooding the place, and I shouted, not words exactly, just sound, just volume, the animal version of, "I know you're there." The back door opened again and closed. We heard gravel on the side of the house. We heard a truck start somewhere in the dark and pull away, slow down the access road. The deputy arrived 22 minutes later. He knew the neighbor's name before I finished describing him. That detail, the deputy's unsurprised expression, the way he just nodded and reached for his radio, was in some ways the most frightening part of the entire night. It meant this wasn't the first call. It meant the mountain had been keeping that secret for a while. We learned later that the man had a key, not a copy he'd made surreptitiously. He had an original because he'd owned the cabin before the current host bought it, and somewhere in the transaction the key had never been collected. He told police he came in to check the pipes. The judge told him something different. We drove home the next morning in the gray, early light, through mountains that looked beautiful and completely indifferent to what had happened, and I have not booked a rural rental since. Some warnings don't look like warnings until they do. The reviews for that cabin now mention some issues with a neighbor in the host's response section. Just that. Some issues with a neighbor. 3 stars from us. I wanted to write more, but I couldn't figure out how to say in the character limit Airbnb gives you that we were asleep in a stranger's bed on a dark mountain while a man with a key walked through the door, and that the scariest part wasn't him. It was how long he had clearly been doing it before we showed up. So I just left 3 stars. Some warnings, I suppose, don't have enough room to say everything. I need to be careful about how I tell this story, because the rational explanation is that I got too high in an isolated cabin and had a panic attack that cascaded into something I'm still not entirely sure how to categorize. That's the true version. That's what happened. But the experience itself, the 4 or 5 hours that I lived through that night in a cabin outside of Parsons, West Virginia, didn't feel like a panic attack. It felt like a door had opened inside my own mind and something enormous and cold had walked through it, and the door wouldn't close again, and I was no longer sure which side of it I was standing on. I'm telling you this because someone needs to say it plainly. Isolated cabins, altitude, unfamiliar darkness, and edibles are a combination that should come with a warning label the size of the mountain itself. The setup was innocent. 3 of us, me, my college roommate Dario, and his girlfriend Priya, had booked a long weekend in a remote cabin in the Monongahela National Forest region. True backcountry stuff. No neighbors, no cell signal past the last half-mile of road, a hand pump well and a composting toilet and a loft with 4 bunks. The listing was honest about its remoteness, and we thought that sounded amazing. We were 26. We thought everything that was extreme sounded amazing. Dario had brought edibles from home, proper ones labeled, from a dispensary. He'd had them before. I had had edibles exactly twice in my life, both times in very controlled, very urban environments, surrounded by people and delivery food and the ambient comfort of a city that never fully goes quiet. I took one. Then, because nothing happened in 40 minutes and I told myself I'd built up a tolerance, I took another half. Then we went to sit on the back porch as the sun dropped behind the ridge line. And I want you to understand, What dark looks like in a place with no light pollution, no neighbors, no road sounds, no ambient glow of any kind. It looks like nothing, actual nothing. The tree line disappeared. The sky was a different kind of black from the earth, but barely. And the forest made sounds I'd never heard in my life. Not threatening sounds necessarily, just sounds. Constant, layered, vast, indifferent, ancient. The sound of something that has been here for tens of millions of years and does not notice you at all. That's when it hit. And it hit like a truck that had been driving toward me for 45 minutes without headlights. One moment I was on the porch. The next moment, and I mean this with clinical precision, I was watching myself on the porch from somewhere slightly above and behind my own body. Dissociation, I know now, is the word for it. The clinical literature is clear. But the experience of it, in total darkness, on a mountain, with no cell service and no familiar sounds and no city hum to remind you that you are a person inside a civilization, inside a species that exists, the experience of it was not clinical. It was cosmological. I became convinced with total and elaborate certainty that the cabin was not a cabin, that it was a threshold, that the sounds in the forest were not animals, but presences, moving toward the light that we'd left on inside, drawn by warmth, the way everything cold is drawn to warmth. I couldn't speak for a while. Dario noticed first. He got me inside and put on every light and made me hold a warm mug and kept his voice at the specific frequency people use when they're hiding their own fear to manage yours. Priya read aloud from a book. Any book, she just grabbed one. And the sound of a human voice reading ordinary sentences was the most stabilizing thing I have ever experienced. But even as I came back to myself in increments, even as I recognized the cabin for what it was, wood, insulation, a loft, a borrowed place on a mountain, some part of my mind kept pulling at a loose thread. What if the feeling was the real thing? And this, the mug, the lamp, the reassuring voices, what if this was the constructed part? What if I had stepped through something out there on the porch and the way back was closed now? I know, sitting here typing this, that none of that is true. I know what dissociation is. I know what THC does to a brain at altitude in an unfamiliar dark space. I know the Appalachian forest is a biome, not a consciousness. But I also know that I didn't sleep that night and that at some point around 4 in the morning, when the first gray light came into the trees and made them real again, I started crying with a relief so total it scared me almost as much as the fear had. We left before breakfast. I've told this story at parties and people laugh in the right places and call it a bad trip. And maybe that's all it was. But I still haven't gone back to the mountains alone. And I still, sometimes, have the feeling, for just a half second when I stand in a dark room, that I'm watching myself from slightly above and behind, just for half a second. Then it passes. Then I'm back.